Welcome to Here Be Dragons. This is the Dragonhood podcast. Today I'm here with Claire, the founder and CEO of the Dragonhood, and we're going to give you a little bit of an overview about what this podcast is going to be about, what the format's going to look like in the future, and just start to talk to you about some of these hot topics that we're interested in. So first of all, we're going to introduce ourselves. Claire, do you want to let people know what is your role and just some basic ideas about the Dragonhood?
Thank you so much, Rachel. Yeah, I'm the founder and CEO, or Chief Empowerment Officer, as I prefer to think of it. And this is really about creating a community, a space for us to learn and grow together, a space for us to find our way forward and connect with our innermost gifts, our most authentic selves, and to take up space in the world around us. This is really about how we learn together to benefit from each other's experiences and find a path forward where we can be our fullest, most powerful, authentic selves and enjoy all that that brings.
Thank you, Claire. We're so excited to get to know you better on future episodes as well. And we're going to discover a little bit more today. I'll take a moment to introduce myself as well to the listeners. I'm Rachel Anavnet, head of Fire Breathing. That is our fun way of saying content creation. So I'm here to get everyone engaged and to let you know what we're here about. I want to get you interested and excited and a part of this conversation. So welcome to Here Be Dragons. Let's talk a little bit about why we wanted to do a podcast. What's this podcast all about? We wanted a way to be able to dive into some tricky topics, wanted you to get to know us as we are starting this journey together. We're learning, growing, and healing all the time. And this is a great way for us to explore it together as a conversation. So it's a back and forth and a way for us to explore those topics. And we did want to make an acknowledgement here at the beginning, too, of who we are and what our experience is. So we're both cis het white women, and that is our experience and where we're coming from. And we absolutely acknowledge this is just one viewpoint of a myriad of options. So do take that into consideration when you're listening to this. And we want to hear from you. We want to hear your different perspectives. We want to hear your background and how what we're talking about impacted you and how it's making you grow or think about things in a different way. So we wanted to talk a little bit too about the format where we're having this conversation. We're doing this as colleagues, of course, working at the Dragonhood as collaborators, and we're friends too in real life. Fun fact. So we thought this would be a great way for us to explore some of those ideas and for everyone to get sort of an inside seat into friends chatting about difficult topics.
Yeah, we're super excited to have a forum to, I was joking earlier, but wax eloquent on topics that are of deep personal interest to us. So we've been joking about starting a podcast for years, and this seemed like a great avenue too, to sort of give these thoughts space and see if other people, to your point, resonates for other people.
Exactly. We think of this as like a start to a conversation. It's not the end point. It's just the beginning. We would like to see you to write into our comment section, have conversations there, or send us an email. We'll have all of that information up on the screen or in the show notes. So now that we've covered some of the basics and our audience knows what to expect, let's dive into the Dragonhood. So Claire, talk to us. What is the Dragonhood? If someone's just coming across this for the first time, what is this?
So it's really about finding a way to tap into those inner strengths, your most authentic version of yourself, and to bring that forward and to let that supercharge your career, the space you're taking up at work and in your personal life, and really tapping into what I like to think of as my inner dragon and enabling that to supercharge how I move through the world. It is really challenging to hold yourself in a way that feels sufficient to the space you're afforded, right? The perception of how much space you can take up is something I think have been thinking a lot about. And it's that idea of just taking up all the space that you can and should. That is really what the Dragonhood is about. And we can unpack that a little bit more, through these conversations.
What inspired you coming from corporate America to start the Dragonhood? What did you see that filled a need, that you wanted to fill a need? What was it in your experience that made you think, oh, I need to start something to empower other people in this way?
Yeah, it was really about this sort of arc in my career where I kept having these experiences of, I'll use the phrase feeling like I was too much. And I think we can all relate to those moments where you sort of have that interaction. You go, was I too much? And by too much, I think we all mean like, was that too much of my real self that just peeked through there? Should I have held it back and had a more professional demeanor or a more uh, stern demeanor? You know, as women, we're always sort of balancing that feeling of appearance in these corporate settings or in these work settings. So one of the things that came to me in my career, my experience, was the exhaustion I mentioned earlier of holding myself small enough to fit into the space that was afforded me in my career. And what I mean by that is, again, not being too bright, not being taking up too much space, not having too many loud ideas, not objecting too much. And none of this is about being rude or aggressive, right? This is all about how we move through the world and our perception of ourself. And this sort of moment in time that I think, as I've been doing coaching, that feeling of keeping yourself small, of maybe we're too much, is something we've all sort of learned. I think, as particularly as women, right? I think that's something we've all internalized in a way that is really interesting. So as I've had that experience myself of moving through the idea of, I'm going to say what I really think. I'm going to be kind and thoughtful, but I'm going to put my real thoughts forward. I'm going to offer my opinion even when it's not asked for. I'm going to assume that my seat at this table adds value. All those things. And I know some of those feel cliche, but it's really true when you start to be authentic, which is easy to say and hard to do. And we're part of what we want to talk about is that journey.
Mm-hmm.
When you can be your authentic self all the time, that is what supercharges your ability to move through the world. And my experience is it's a lighter, brighter way to move through the world. You know, we still deal with hard things and sadness, but I'm not holding in this version of myself that is magnificent and maybe a little scary, because dragons are powerful, right? The idea of that powerful woman can be a little scary. So that's another thing that, you know, I hope we can spend some time on too over the coming episodes.
Yeah, and I love what you're saying about having your seat at the table having value, because I think so many of us approach the world where we feel like we're having to show that we deserve that seat, and that's the point of view that we're coming from, not that I already have value and here's how I'm going to contribute that value. It's always feeling like I still have to prove myself. And, you know, a lot of this is learned from being in school, you know, as children. What you were saying earlier about don't be too bright, don't be too talk, don't be too loud, all those things. I mean, those are things that we learn growing up, that you don't want to stand out too much, you know, and that's something that I think so many of us have experienced in different ways, you know, depending on our backgrounds. But that's definitely something I think resonates with a lot of people, and changing your thinking on that takes so much time. It doesn't come naturally, I think, to a lot of us because it was taught out of us.
That's
So,
right. And in varying degrees, right? We acknowledged our perspective we bring to the world. Standing out can be downright dangerous for some people to move through the world, right? We know our experience, we come from a place of privilege. When we talk about, you know, not being able to be authentic, our lives are not in danger. And I know that's not true for, you know, some of our trans colleagues, family members, loved ones. Colleagues. Like we have that privilege. So want to acknowledge that too. And the world should be more welcoming and should allow that for everyone, not just us. But I do think it's really important that we acknowledge that and continue to push and use that privilege to push for the space for everyone to be able to do that.
absolutely. Absolutely. And so now that we've sort of talked a little bit about the surface and how we felt that the Dragonhood serves a purpose, let's talk a little bit deeper and go a little bit further into what you were first talking about when we first realized that we're supposed to not take up space, that we're taught as children to do the opposite of dragoning, actually. So in conversations in the past, you and I have talked a lot about dragon symbolism. So I'd like to dive into that a little bit more, talk about what that symbolism has meant to you and how it's evolved over time for you.
Absolutely. So can start even with the name of the podcast. So Here Be Dragons is, a legendary feature on ancient maps or older maps. So where we go past the known world,
Mhm.
often the cartographers would draw a dragon or a sea monster, and that was labeled Here Be Dragons, meaning the unknown. We are in the unknown. We don't know what's there. So that alone is one of the really meaningful pieces of why we wanted to call this podcast Here Be Dragons, to sort of thinking about it in terms of, we hear from folks like Brene Brown, braving the wilderness, right? Going into this other space, and taking up space that feels good for us, even when the world around us maybe doesn't appreciate it. So that's one level. But when we think about going back to childhood, even, and depending on your age and your experience, you have different associations with dragons, right? Maybe a Game of Thrones association or others. For me, it was really the Disney Sleeping Beauty. That movie had this gorgeous illustration, gorgeous colors, and this powerful, powerful woman in it who was able to turn into a dragon, was able to prevent child marriage, who was able to do all sorts of things, and was the villain of the entire movie. And often her power, her cool outfit, right? Everything about her was so intriguing to me. And I truly identified with Maleficent, as she is known, Maleficent, more so than our Sleeping Beauty or Aurora. And it was so interesting. I never made much of that. It was sort of a passing thought, that, gosh, I'm really supposed to like the princess. And, but these sort of attraction, even at an early age, to these sort of powerful female figures is something that has long been with me. So that's one. And then again, we talked about this too, when you layer in, it's not a leap to layer in this sort of symbolism of the powerful woman as a dragon, right? This ferocious, large, magnificent animal that also, frankly, mythological, right? So sort of getting us on two levels, but the idea that something so powerful should be feared, and a woman that can live that way should absolutely be feared and cast as the evil, wicked witch in every story. So, as you think about that narrative, and I'm not the first person to think this way, right? We've, much recently has been talked about where they're inverting fairy tales, right? Or talking about fairy tales differently. And you're hearing like, hey, maybe Ursula was right? Maybe Ursula is the hero of that story. Again, stopping someone from trading in their life to marry someone at 16, being a plus-sized, fat, beautiful, powerful sea witch when, the world around her valued only slender beauty, right? A certain specific beauty ideal. And we certainly embrace all body types here at Here Be Dragons and in the Dragonhood, but sort of that idea of there's only one right way. So some of those types of themes have always been things that I think about.
Yeah, that's fascinating that from such a young age you were aware of that connection that you made to someone who was so powerful and answered to no one, which I think is also a very attractive trait of Maleficent for sure. I was talking with some friends yesterday actually about how empowering it would be if you weren't invited to a party that you would then curse everyone in a kingdom and just tear everything down. But yeah, it's incredible that that story still resonates today, even though the original movie was years and years and years ago, but it's still a topic of conversation now.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the Angelina Jolie retelling covers some of that, right? Like that, certainly that storyline has been explored in 2 movies now, right? Like where we meet Maleficent at a much deeper level. And gosh, yeah, sure, she was pissed. She had every right to be, right? They literally stole her wings. Like there's no bigger metaphor for like having your wings clipped, having your power taken,
Right.
and sort of being governed in that way against your will. Like that is, it's truly something that, again, not a leap for people to relate to. And you're right. I mean, the idea of going to a party you weren't invited to as an adult person, like that is badass. I don't know that I've ever done it, to be honest. Just walked into a room where I wasn't invited. Maybe that's a challenge for us to consider at the Dragonhood.
Stay tuned. We'll
Show up
film
to a
that
meeting
too.
you weren't invited to. Yeah, 100%.
We'll add it to a list of challenges or
Yeah,
something. Badass bingo. Make sure you.
I love that. I love that.
So now that we sort of have a starting point and understanding where this dragon symbolism came from, I'd like to explore with you a bit about how embracing your inner dragon and letting your wings spread and not be clipped, how has that impacted your corporate life? Like, how has that impacted you at work? I know we've got lots to talk about, in personal life as well, but let's specifically talk about work for a second.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And it was a many years journey to that space. And when I started at the company I'm actually currently with, this wonderful place to work with lots of strong female leaders and space that enabled me to grow, there was also, which is the case in many places, spaces that were more traditionally male dominated. When we think of, corporate America, you do tend to think of white male privilege, those types of spaces. That is changing. Many companies are working hard on that, but there's still spaces that are, I would say, influenced and geared toward the male experience. So it wasn't easy to maybe be feminine or to spend too much time thinking about or presenting in a feminine or soft way. So, I'm maybe a little older than some of our listeners. Some of our older listeners are going to be like, I know exactly what you're talking about. I didn't wear anything but a black suit with a white button-down shirt and black pantyhose. So I wasn't quite that level, but coming, sort of after that in these sort of overly feminine, overly bright would get you noticed, and not in a good way. So there was that aspect of it. Then there was also the speaking up too frequently aspect of it. So I am somebody who thinks out loud. I am somebody who ideates. I am somebody who senses what's going on in a room and feels the dynamic of the meeting. And it's called galvanizing. And we'll spend a whole podcast on working genius and those sort of different traits that enable us. But as I didn't even have a word for galvanizing at the time. So I was holding that in. So seeing how I could have an opportunity to have a positive impact, but not sharing it. And it would sort of, holding that all in addition to my tendency to ideate and hey, have you thought about this? Right. So just sort of holding all those pieces in, presenting at work in a way that was not necessarily authentic either. And every time, it felt like many times when I would push those limits, wear something bright, you'd hear a comment about, oh, look at that color you're wearing, or, oh, that's different, or, any number of things in those tiny little comments that add up. And certainly, again, as a white woman, that is a mere drop in the bucket of the experiences of microaggressions that other people deal with. But the context in work was that it shrunk me. And I, again, internalized that sense of don't take up too much space, don't be too loud, don't be too smart, don't be too anything, too much. So that was part of it. So as I began to sort of shed those layers in a work environment that, while it wasn't perfect, was enabling of, testing those waters and sort of saying like, oh, hey, I have an idea. And the reaction was, that's awesome. Thank you so much. Let's do that. So like really noticing that the praise and positive reaction to my ideas and recommendations and contributions was like noticeable to me, was
Mhm.
something that made me realize like, oh, I got a positive feedback there. Let me keep doing a little bit more of that. So little by little over time, I started to really be cognizant of it so I could do it intentionally. And it was in an environment where that was rewarded. Now, I also bump up against, you still in any environment bump up against some of those sort of negative experiences, but coming from a place of strength to really be able to say like, no, this is who I am. And I'm adding value. Like I said, it's not something that you have to second guess, right? Second guessing yourself a lot, I think, is something folks could probably relate to as well. Like when you
Mhm.
do that, I don't know if folks, or if you've experienced this, Rachel, where you might come off a meeting or an interaction, and even at a personal level, and you sort of like replay the whole thing and you go, oh gosh, like, was that too much? Was I
All the
this or
time.
that? Did I not? Right. So
Yep.
that sort of mental debrief that I think as I've been coaching is very common to the folks that I coach, like reassessing everything. I was too much, and I use that phrase all the time. Were you too much, or were you what the situation needed? And I think that struggle with too much is when you feel your gifts being called to come forth and be needed in a space and you try to hold them in, that's the too much. Like that's the tension. And even having words for that has been really helpful for me. I feel like maybe I'm going on and on about this, but
Oh,
that's sort of some of those experiences.
well, and what a great takeaway too. Like if you take away nothing else, take away that idea that you can ask yourself, am I being too much or am I being just the right amount for this situation? I think that's a great takeaway for people to have. Um, yeah, I know from a lot of my peers that the agonizing over what we've said in a meeting or a work interaction, that takes a lot of our headspace. And that's something that I mean, I can remember something that I feel like maybe was like a slap on the wrist or an embarrassing moment from years past, and you hang
Yeah.
on to those. And it's not a healthy thing to do, but it is a natural human thing to do, I think, to play that over and
I
over.
mean, one thing that's happened more than once is being a woman in the room and being asked or someone commenting on the fact that you take notes. And I actually stopped taking notes in meetings because in a period of time where I felt like I was being put into a certain place or my role was being minimized.
Mhm.
And shout out to all the executive admins out there that support all of us and are the note takers and the organizers and do all that. But sort of that shouldn't have been made to be less than. And that's how I learned. So I need to write and take notes to sort of internalize information. It helps me focus.
Mhm.
I actually stopped doing that for years because of
Mm.
one comment that somebody made that embarrassed me in front of some pretty powerful, from my perspective, powerful people in the organization that like, oh, you're always taking notes. What do you do with all those notes? Like it was demeaned. So I literally stopped a learning method that I knew was important for me and helped me for many, many years. And I'm very proud to say that I long since been taking notes and, making sure that I get what I need out of meetings and I'm able to focus. But,
Good.
a great example of like how much our behavior is influenced and changed by those around us. And you have to really notice those feelings are. You have to notice and be curious with yourself about what's going on. And that is hard to do. That self-awareness, that piece is hard because anytime you're like, ugh, that felt icky. I just want to make it go away. So I'm just not going to take notes anymore because I don't ever want to feel icky again. Right. Like that's
Right.
seems like a really good way to solve it, but it
Yeah.
actually, in the long run can be problematic.
Right. Especially when it's something that's a learning tool for you.
Yeah. I
But
mean, even saying it out loud to you now feels nuts,
yeah,
but that's where I was.
right. No, I get it. And I do think it's important to talk about a little bit too that it's problematic in so many ways. One, that it's minimizing that role, as you said. Another, that the expectation shouldn't be there that a woman will always necessarily be the note taker in a room. just like we are often, women are typically assigned the emotional support roles, even in the
Yep.
workplace. It's and these are big societal changes. And you were talking before about being in a workplace that let you, once you started to take that seat at the table, once you started to give your ideas, they were receptive to it. That's not going to be everyone's experience.
That's
We
right.
don't all have supportive work environments. And I know a lot of listeners are dealing with toxic workplaces or workplaces that simply don't value employees. And that is a real experience for a lot of people. But some of the tools that we hope that you're gathering here and through the Dragonhood can help you, A, to get out of a toxic workspace, B, to advocate for yourself even while you're in that space, because not everyone also has the luxury to move positions or to get something new. So you've got a lot of options without feeling that you can't do anything because societal changes have to be made or giant total workplace changes have to be made. You still got some options available to you, at least to develop yourself and to feel more confident in yourself and your abilities. And maybe it's a way to hold up a mirror to your situation and realize where you are. And maybe that's the main thing that you need to do, and then to take assessment of your life from there. So
So true. Such good points, Rachel. And I think people need to know that, safety in your work environment, your personal, emotional, psychological safety is so important. And if you're feeling the lack of that, it almost feels like you're gaslighting yourself, right? Like that can be really challenging. So acknowledging what's really happening goes a long way. The power of reframing a challenging situation is something that's remarkable. And I think in a future episode, we will definitely bring in our chief organizational psychologist, Dr. Jennifer Benjamin, to talk about the power of reframing and how she supported our Dragonhood with crosswalking these tools into peer-reviewed research models that are really about organizational dynamics. And there's so many options that people have. And we want to bring some of those conversations to everybody too. Like, I'm in a really tough environment. How would you navigate X? Like, that's going to be a really important piece of the conversation. And the first foundational piece of that is just confidence in your inner power and who you are and what you want and deserve, and acknowledging that is a really helpful, initial reframe. That is tapping into your inner dragon. That is when we talk about the Dragonhood, which I love, right? The camaraderie of a genderless, wonderful pack of magnificent beings that are all here thriving together. Like, this is what it's about. So really bringing those learnings to everybody.
yeah, that's fantastic. I'm excited about this, and I can feel the listeners getting excited and or frustrated that we are sprinkling these little teasers all throughout about all of these wonderful topics that we're going to talk about in greater detail in future episodes. But I hope that is something that's exciting to you and makes you want to subscribe and listen further. We're going to have some wonderful in-depth conversations in the future. So don't despair if you've heard something that we mentioned and didn't touch again. We're going to talk about it in greater detail later. So we've talked a lot about your corporate experience and your experience in a large organization. Do you think these coaching techniques and all of this information that we're talking about, do you think that is mostly applicable to corporate America, or do you think that this is something that can apply further?
I think it's anywhere there are relationship dynamics at play. I think the most immediate experience that people think of is their work experience. We spend most of our days, most of our time in those work environments, whether they're remote or whatever, those interpersonal relationships, that's where we spend the majority of our time. So that is often first and foremost. I have learned that I am who I am all the time, which sounds ridiculous to say, but the strengths, frustrations, challenges that I face, joy, all those things that I face at work, I face in my day-to-day life. And one of the very powerful realizations was, oh, I'm this way all the time.
Yes.
So like the idea that we mentioned galvanizing and working genius, and we will unpack that. And we have some brilliant experts to bring to talk about that. But the idea that I was like the revelation of being a galvanizer, not just at work, but like all the time, is remarkable. So in my own experience, I'm coached by a wonderfully talented human being, Donna McLean from Agents of Way, and we will definitely bring her on at a future date.
Yeah.
But I would come into a coaching session and she'd say, "Oh, how was your weekend?" And I don't know. I am exhausted. I was doing this, and this. She goes, Claire, you were galvanizing all weekend. Oh, like and it didn't just happen once. Like it really took a couple of like, hey,
Yep.
you're exhausted because you were galvanizing for 48 hours straight at your friend's wedding or at, whatever. So like, not only is it a superpower, but like acknowledging it and knowing like, hey, you got to monitor your energy, all those types of things. Like, yes, it happens all the time.
Mhm.
It happens. I will share that my partner, my husband, is known to say to me, like, can you stop managing me right now? Like, oh, right. Let me turn that down. Right. Like just, it's a remarkable thing. And having language for it is something that I want to spend time on too, for everybody, like putting words to these experiences that we can then have a vocabulary together to pull forward creates so much power for everybody involved. And again, takes the temperature down even as you're taking up more space. So it's this beautiful inverse corollary, or I don't think
Yes.
I'm doing that right, but
But no, and it's another aspect of being self-aware in some way in these relationships. And even if you're continuing to do that behavior, at least you are aware, oh, that is what it is. Like, and like you say, labeling it so that eventually you can get to that place where you're managing it a bit
yeah.
more and handling that a little bit better. Whatever that means to you and in your life and situation. So that's great. Well, and two, I have also been coached by a brilliant, wonderful woman who I'm interviewing right now. And I'm not from corporate America. I don't know if I mentioned that before. I'm not in the corporate world. I've worked in libraries basically my whole working career. And I have to say that those coaching sessions, those life lessons have been incredibly helpful for recognizing the positions that I put myself into, the ones that I stayed in perhaps too long, ones where I needed to stand up for myself and speak up for myself, even in a world more akin to the nonprofit sector.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of these things, they work, whether it's friendships, it's through your relationship with your partner, a different kind of working experience, from, are you a dog walker? Are you in corporate America? Are you a librarian? You've got all these options, and you're still yourself existing in these situations, and you still need to have some of that vocabulary to be able to know how to handle the situations that crop up and to handle power dynamics and all of that. So yes, I can personally attest that this is helpful no matter where you are. So tell your friends.
That's so great. And thank you, Rachel. I think it's the highest praise to sort of have a chance to sort of help a friend and a Dragonhood colleague. But the experience is just so positive. It feels like such a beautiful gift to share with people. And that's what we want to do, is really bring this to as many people as possible and sort of find that pathway to empowerment and joy.
Mhm.
And I've said this before, but it's just a calmer, different way to move through the world. And it feels so much better. It's not always easy. It is not perfect. Plenty of disruptions. I had a small breakdown myself over my hair not parting properly. So I'm not all, a Zen goddess over here. Like, that's the reality of the world. We live in these really high energy, fast-paced universes with constant stimulus, all that kind of stuff. So if we can find a way to sort of float above some of that stuff, really be anchored in our authentic selves, to fly over it, as it were, spread our wings and fly. That's really what we want to try to do for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And And it's not an exaggeration to me, and in my personal experience with this, to call it life-changing. It is, again, because of a lot of reasons that Claire's already mentioned about how much time we invest in our professional lives, no matter what that profession looks like, the amount of time of our lives there versus at home. And if you are allowing yourself to be crammed, if you're putting yourself into a box, that's a lot of hours to make your wings soar.
Yeah.
And they need to be stretched, and they need to have exercise. And so absolutely a life-changing experience for me personally. And I hope that will be the case for so many of you listening, that you found a new way to approach your life, personally, professionally, what have you. So, well, I know we've talked about a lot today. And we've given the audience a lot to think about and a lot of teasers for things that are upcoming. So let's talk a little bit about a couple of action items. And that's what we want to do in this podcast. We don't want it just to be you listening to these fascinating conversations that we're going to have with not only wonderful people like ourselves, but these future guest speakers that we're going to have, who truly have so much knowledge and experience to share with us. And we're excited to hear from them. But we do want to end every episode with action items for you to take with you until the next episode, or until your next coaching session. So we want to talk about some things that you can be doing. So these are things we want you to be thoughtfully pondering, things that we hope that you'll internalize and notice about yourself going forward over these next couple of weeks until you hear from us again. So to start that off, Claire has a wonderful poem to share with you. And so we'll listen to that first, and then we'll talk about some action items.
Yes, thank you, Rachel. So I want to share an excerpt from Morgan Harper Nichols, All Along You Were Blooming, Thoughts for Boundless Living. It is a beautiful illustrated collection. Highly recommend you buy all of her books from your local independent bookstore or bookshop.org, hashtag not an ad. But wanted to read this passage. It's just remarkable. So, you may not have the next few years figured out, and there are times when you want to speak up, but do not know how. But when the words finally come and you find the courage to open up, your story will not be too much.
Thank you, Claire. I think that's so beautiful. I'm tearing up. I warned Claire this would happen.
Morgan's words are just beautiful and such a lovely encapsulation of what we've been talking about, and just truly moving. And I think moving because it's such a human experience that we can all relate to. And, you know, that's the takeaway for today. You are not too much. And we want you to spend the intervening time till we meet again, just noticing when you feel like you're too much. Don't react to the ick and just pivot to make it go away. Notice what it is. Notice the feeling. Notice if you can unpack it a little bit, if it feels safe to spend a little time there. What was happening? What was really happening that made you feel like you were too much? And let's just start there, noticing when we feel like we're too much and how we react to that. That's our homework, our action item.
Yes. And I think that's a great way to end it, to realize, you know, we're all on this journey at different points. And we might not have those words yet. We might not know how to express ourselves quite yet. But we're going to. And, you know, there's hopefulness in this. There's hopefulness in this action item. There's hopefulness in these activities that we're asking you to do. And I think that's something that we can hold on to. So give yourself grace, give yourself space. And we'll put in the work together, right?
That's right. It's going to be a wonderful time together in the Dragonhood. We are going to have so much fun, so much learning, and so much joy together.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you for listening to our founder's story today, and the very origins of the Dragonhood. We're so excited for you to join us on this journey that we're all going to take together, and we're going to be in this wonderful space learning and growing together. So we're just going to leave you with some final few words, and we will see you in the next episode.
Thank you so much, Rachel. And thank you all for joining us today. We're going to leave you with a little bit of our Dragonhood mantra, which is be authentic, be curious, be accepting, take up space, and awaken your inner dragon.